even when I'm down. Got my head in the clouds and my feet on the ground. I got big dreams, gonna make them true.
Yeah, we're going to make those dreams true. 2021 is the year that we make dreams come true because we're going to realize our greatness here in the GeniusLab. So thanks for being with me today, and I am excited to talk to you about realizing your greatness by eradicating shame. And this is kind of interesting because I've done a lot of work with people who were so engulfed with shame and so permeated their psyche that they couldn't find a good thing about themselves. And it was really sad. But unfortunately, it's also really common. And so I started talking to some different psychology people and asked them about shame and blame, and talked to some religious scholars, and they're like, well, it's human nature to feel shame. It tells you when you're doing right and wrong. And I'm like, something really didn't resonate very well with me on that one. Because I don't think that humans naturally go to blame and shame. It's a disastrous emotional condition that completely robs you of all self-esteem and value. But then I realized that from a religious perspective, since most theologians talk about original sin and that we're born sinful and unclean, and the only way that we can be right with God is by following their religion. Whether that's, claiming Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior is one, following, going to confession every week and then saying your Hail Marys and Our Fathers. You can tell I'm not Catholic. Whatever those prayers are that they say. and then you're okay. And there's all this stuff. So I'm like, okay, so those guys don't get it. That's trained behavior. And it's right and wrong based on somebody else's rules. Where the power of self-esteem is in establishing your own core values and your own core beliefs and then sticking with them. And then the goal of life is to come into congruence or come into alignment with those core values and core beliefs. And it's just amazing sometimes to look at how people are so incredibly inconsistent. They lack congruence and they can't figure out why they don't have any power in their lives. And I remember talking to this evangelical friend of mine. And of course, we did the unpardonable sin. We talked about politics. And he told me, what his political view was and who he was going to vote for. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I brought up some things that this particular person, this particular politician had said and done. And I'm like, so those are core values of yours. And he said, oh my God, no, that's horrible. And then like, how can you vote for them? Well, because I'm this particular party and I've always been this party and I just don't vote for the other party. And I'm like, well, Have you ever stopped to really take a look at what you're supporting? And it was really an interesting story because he never did. He just thought that his particular political view was the Christian view and never really stopped to think about the actions, the behavior and the message of the politician he was going to vote for. And it really threw him into a spin because he didn't really know what to do. And unfortunately, he didn't have enough self-esteem to make his own decision on that. So he went with what his pastor told him. And I asked him if I could talk to his pastor, and he said, I don't think that's a good idea. Because I'm curious. I'm totally, whether it's a, I remember when I was in the religion business, I had gone to seminary, and my mentor was the head of this huge church that was hosting our school. And this guy was telling all this stuff and you should be faithful to your wife and be a good steward of God's money and all this other stuff. And it turned out he was having an affair with 8 different women, and he had embezzled over $500,000 from the church. So I'm like, okay, this guy is incongruent. So I need to change this. What I told him was, I said, I'm too honest to be in this business with you. And anyway, the thing that it got me to was many, many years later when I was studying with the Dagara people of West Africa, who actually are congruent with their core values and core beliefs. It was really interesting because I was talking to my teacher, Samofu, and I said, so we were talking about shame and blame and low self-esteem. And she's like, yeah, when I came to the States, I couldn't believe how people they had such poor self-esteem. They couldn't make decisions for themselves. They had to check with all these people and their coach, guru, leader, pastor, whatever. She said, it just didn't make any sense to me because in the village, that's not how we operate. And I said, well, that's interesting. She said, yeah, I was here 8 years before I understood the feeling of shame. And I'm like, 8 years? She said, yeah. And unfortunately, it finally got me. But she said, in the village, we don't have judgment against people's behavior, and we don't take a personal assault on a child for acting a certain way. They're not a bad boy or a bad girl, or a sinner. They don't exist. Everyone is born a genius, and it's the job of the village to acknowledge and support the genius that resides in each and every person. So the idea is, with positive affirmation and positive direction, we adjust the behavior of a child to come into alignment with the core values of the village. And if there ever was a case where they wouldn't, then we would ask, what are the ancestors trying to show us by the unruliness or the incapacity of this person to come into alignment with core values? Do we need to look at our core? It's all a learning experience, right? They don't judge anybody. They don't throw them under the bus like they do in the West. I can't tell you how many times I heard from my mom, you're a bad boy, and I was bad because I had so much energy and was running around all the time. I didn't actually do like bad things. I never hurt anybody. I didn't kill anyone. I didn't break anything. Well, I might have broke a few things, but not intentionally. But so my very nature made me bad because I had so much light and so much fun, and life was a big game for me. It simply showed a light on my mother's misery, and so she had to make me bad for that. So it's really one of the ways that we can come into our power and realize our greatness is by looking at the things that we feel shame for and ask ourselves, why do I feel shame for that? Is what I'm doing truly shameful? Is it really an assault on my humanity or an assault on my core values? Most people don't even know their core values. This is why I created the GeniusLab sessions, which you can find at tobychristensen.com. It's basically what we do is we establish your top core values, your top core beliefs, your worldview, and your mission. And these are really powerful things that when you know it, when you focus on it, and when you become congruent, and that is bringing your thoughts, your speech, and your actions into alignment with these things, you become a powerhouse that is unstoppable. So it's fascinating to look at the fact that shame is not human nature. It's trained. In the village, they don't have shame. It's so interesting. I watched the way that the men and the women, mostly the women, because the women raise the children, and then the men, after initiation, the men train the kids how to be adults. And actually, when they're little babies, the grandparents actually raise them. So anyway, the idea is positive instruction to come into alignment with core values. Okay, this is what we believe, and these are our values, and this is why. And wow, when you get that, it's great. The thing about blame and shame is that they're huge destabilizers of self-esteem. They lower it, and they erode self-confidence, and they make people question judgment. And they basically turn you into a follower and completely eliminate your ability to lead. A good leader will find the genius in everyone. A good leader will bring out the best in everyone. And I had this boss when I worked for a company he was an ex-military guy, and he just couldn't help himself. Everything was, oh, you goddamn, and all degrading, you loser, blah, 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 you're $1,000 under your quota, and blah, 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 blah. And it was all about berating so that I would somehow be inspired to prove him wrong. And I don't operate that way. It actually tore me to pieces. But of course, I turned around and kicked his ass and ended up being like 4 times what my quota was by the end of the year. So take that. But but if we look at something like self-esteem is confidence in one's own worth and abilities. Okay? It's about self-respect. Okay? If you think about that, self-esteem is really an important thing. I hear a lot of bad mouthing the ego, a lot of New Agers. Oh, we have to eradicate the ego. The ego is your sense of self. You don't want to eradicate or eliminate the ego. You don't want to knock it out. You just want to have it be in alignment with your core values and your core beliefs, And the ego is a very good thing, and so it gives you your sense of self. And that gives you your sense of power. And when that's in alignment with your core values, guess what? You change the world and you make things happen. Blame is assigning responsibility for a fault or a wrong. Okay? So that's talk about being completely counterproductive to bringing someone into their self-worth and their power. It's totally damaging to the psyche and to the self-esteem of an individual. Or sometimes in a group situation, you'll see people blame, it was this group, or it was that group, or it was the right or the left or the radical, whatever. Around 9/11, we heard, horrible things about Muslims. And as we find out, the Muslims aren't bad. Radicalized Taliban do nasty things, nasty from our perspective, but then from their perspective, they're doing God's work. So, again, it all depends on your core values and your core beliefs. So then you look at shame. So shame is a painful feeling of humiliation or distress caused by consciousness of wrong or foolish behavior. I love that definition. A painful feeling of humiliation. Like, how is that ever helpful? It would be much better to just, adjust a person's thinking by, hey, this is not socially acceptable. This isn't helpful. You're not bad or wrong for doing it. It just doesn't work. These are the results that you get, and they're not favorable. You're an amazing genius, and now it's time for you to realize your greatness, and that's not greatness behavior, and so this is what is. Like, my parents would yell at me, but they would never tell me what the other thing to do is that would get me the reward. Okay? So they would just yell and scream about the bad stuff. So then you have self-deprecation, which comes from blame and shame, which is you shame yourself before someone else has an opportunity to. And you can always tell people who have a low self-esteem by self-deprecation. It's a way to shame yourself before somebody else does. As you move forward in your life and as you continue to follow this podcast, share it with your friends, please. This is big stuff. And the more people that realize their greatness, the better place the world will be. So think about, what are your core values? What are your core beliefs? how can you come into alignment with being true and congruent with these things? And then start modifying your behavior to come into alignment with these things so you're proactively realizing your greatness. And by all means, keep looking up.